Hi and welcome. In this video I'll introduce the Moodle Embedded or Closed quiz question. The closed answer question allows you to ask multiple questions in multiple formats in one chunk of text, and the answer fields are embedded within the text. At this time, it's possible to create embedded short answers, multiple choice, and numerical element questions, and to combine them all within one question with different point values and feedback for each embedded answer. Closed questions are most commonly used in language teaching, where a passage of text, often accompanied by an illustration, has every fifth or seventh word removed. The learner has to use their understanding of the context to supply the missing text in the correct form of the word. In other variations, all of the words related to the focus of the lesson are removed. For example, all past tense verbs or vocabulary related to, say, medical terminology. These questions are extremely flexible, and I think they allow for a more kind of holistic or integrative assessment. While most of the examples that you'll see here are from language, I think the question type has other useful applications. I can see it being used to ensure students understand the steps of a process or a procedure, or the relationship between associated concepts or facts. As you'll see later, you can determine the weight of each response that each response will receive relative to the others in the question's score calculation. You're also able to assign partial credit or to give 100% credit for more than one answer. You can give feedback for each response in every answer field, and the numerical type seems particularly powerful. On the downside, the questions are a bit cumbersome and maybe time-consuming to create, as there really is no graphical interface right now, so you need to use special syntax to create them. Some people use software like Hot Potatoes to create the questions and import them into Moodle, which seems like it would be a lot quicker. I'll show you a couple of uses of the short answer type question from a beginning Spanish class by Melissa Hargis. I think this is a Spanish 101. So in the top, you'll see the question as presented to the students, and below that is the question with the correct answers filled in. For those of you who've forgotten your basic Spanish, in red you can see the English translation of the answers. So it's a series of questions around the context of a student asking another question about a class. And in order to enter the correct question word, the student has to understand the meaning of the other words in the question. This one is just slightly more difficult. Here the instructor is providing the verb to be used. The first example, number 1, it's tener, and the student needs to just conjugate it correctly, so the correct answer is tienen because it's she. This one gets a little bit more difficult because now the student has to select the correct verb from a choice of 2 and then determine what the correct form is based on the subject. And this final example of the short answer is from a 200 level class. Here the student needs to identify again the verb, but from a given sentence, identify the verb that's in the subjunctive form, write that down, and then to choose the correct reason for why that verb is in the subjunctive. Now here you see one of the multiple choice question types, the drop-down, combined with in the last short answer, the last field, a short answer question. So I think this one is a pretty good example of how a question can be used to assess the understanding of a process, in this case how laser light is created. And finally, a couple of numerical questions combined again with a short answer. This question is testing both recall, but also the student's understanding of the relationship between multiple concepts. Here, a laser's wavelength and how that affects the process of creating semiconductors. So let's take a look now at how these questions are created. So the top image is a question as the student sees it, and in the bottom image is the question with the code. So unlike in other question types, the answers are also entered into the question text field. And if you look at question 1, which is surrounded by the red box, you can see that the code is enclosed within a set of those, curly brackets. The number, which in this case is a 1, is the weight of this answer in relation to the other embedded questions within this question. So if the weight of all of them is 1, you can just leave this out. The question type is preceded and followed by a colon and has to be typed in capital letters. There are abbreviations for the question types. I think SA is the abbreviation for short answer. And then the correct answer is always preceded by an equal sign. Once you enter in the question code, Moodle gives you a way to check that you've set it up correctly. So if you click the Decode and Verify button, it then breaks apart each of these embedded questions and kind of fills out this little form. And it shows you what you've got for the question definition. So it sort of identifies some problems, but it doesn't really tell you how to fix those. In this example, you'll see how the instructor provided partial credit for some of the answers. And so this can be really useful if you have, say, 2 word verbs when only one of the verbs is correctly conjugated. So an equivalent English example would be something like in the present continuous tense, where the correct answer would be are going, but the instructor is going to give half credit for is going or for are goes because one of the 2 verbs is correct. You could also do that same thing for nouns, for example, in the languages that assign genders to the nouns. So recall that the equal sign identifies the correct answer. A tilde is used before all of the other possible answers, and if no percent is identified, then the system assumes that that possible answer is wrong. If you're assigning partial credit, the percent of credit is between 2% signs and in front of the possible answer. So here the instructor is going to give half credit if the student writes the correct question word but forgets the accent mark. And as I mentioned earlier, you can provide feedback for each answer. The feedback follows the answer and is preceded by a pound sign. It's also possible to designate more than one answer as acceptable by assigning 100% to the second acceptable answer. Notice also the use of the little asterisk, which can act as a wildcard for the purposes of providing feedback for any answer other than the 2 correct ones. And finally, here is the syntax and the options for the 3 multiple choice types. To create the multiple choice distractors, you just use the tilde to identify the other possible answers. And unless the percent is specified, the system assumes that that answer is incorrect and awards nothing. So that's a quick overview of the closed question types. If you're interested in using the numerical type with an accepted margin of error, you can find more information about that at docs.moodle.org. I hope you found this interesting, and if you have any other ideas or examples of how this question type can be used, it would be great if you could share them with the rest of the Moodle community.